to talk. It's a friend.
And do they still like to eat?
Yes. We haven't had such good eating here because we don't have a kitchen yet.
Yeah.
So we've just been having cold things. We'll get it.
Wow, thank you.
Wow, you're getting the deluxe treatment.
Make sure I have enough energy to make it through.
Yeah. If you stayed around, forget it. Next week.
Yeah.
Next week it's all over your old hat.
So this is a bit of a free-for-all, I guess.
Yeah, it is.
But especially those who are newer, perhaps here for the first time, if you have questions, doubts, anything you want to share, I want to encourage you to, and of course everyone else knows what this time is for. So, do you do a microphone? Do you do a microphone?
Yeah, because the streamers can't hear. Now,
On.
yes.
I just took a break from, been at the hospital with my mother-in-law today, and she's very close to dying. And she's kind of in a semi-conscious state. She's on morphine for pain. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice about being with someone who's dying. And also, she's someone who I've kind of never felt especially close to. So I'm kind of, so I also wonder if you have advice about kind of how to awaken compassion for her, as well as any special advice about, helping her at this time.
Nice light question. Is your mom Christian? Especially Christian or anything else? Or?
No, it's my mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, sorry.
Specifically, she's definitely non-Christian. And I would say probably agnostic as far as Buddhism. Probably Buddhist friendly.
Of course, dying can be very chaotic, right? Both in terms of the internal experiences that one has, and often even with the best of intentions, family and loved ones who gather around the dying can bring a lot of confusion into the atmosphere. And most of us have the experience that we're in the presence of people who are centered and grounded and calm and can meet adversity with a sense of composure and without overreaction and just clarity, lucidity. That has a palpable effect on us if we're in their presence, or on those that are around them. So I've seen and heard advice from great teachers to try and be that for the people, whether it's the sick or the dying, actually. There are a lot of practices that we can do depending on the practices that we do. Like one of the main practices of the center is Chenrezi. And we say that, so what is Chenrezi? Chenrezi is a manifestation of awakened mind. Yeah. Awakened mind has several components. It has indivisible components: wisdom, compassion, and ability. And sometimes we personify these in the forms of the yidams that we practice, right? So Chenrezi is this personification or this manifestation of awakened compassion, but it doesn't mean that Chenrezi somehow then lacks wisdom and lacks ability, right? All of these are bound up in the essence of awakened mind. So the form that we meditate on is awakened compassion, awakened mind in form. The mantra that we recite is awakened mind, compassion manifest in sound. So certainly in Tibetan culture, where pretty much everybody's Buddhist, and everybody knows Chenrezi, mantras will be recited in the presence of people who are dying. And there are certain mantras that are said to carry enhanced benefit, like just hearing this at the time one dies, there's a special blessing that comes from that because of this direct connection to awakened mind that can have positive effects on the person regardless of their beliefs. And the Chenrezi mantra is one of those mantras. So if it's something that you're comfortable with, doing that practice in her presence could be a really good thing to do. And in terms of the difficulty of the relationship, we have these practices of the four immeasurables where we begin by thinking that other beings in general, or in particular one particular being, they're just like us, right? There's nobody that doesn't want to be happy. There's nobody that wants to suffer. And even if it's someone that we have a really difficult relationship with, through this contemplation, even when people are acting in really strange ways, it's just because they also don't understand the way things are. They don't understand the means that are going to accomplish their happiness and are going to alleviate them of their suffering. So they act in these strange ways, lashing out at others, thinking that somehow this is of benefit to them. It's going to fulfill them in some way. And especially once people are vulnerable, like in a space where they're sick or when they're approaching death. Even if to date we haven't been able to work skillfully with this person in our life, that can be an opening, Seeing their vulnerability can create an opening. So reflecting like that, whatever difficulty we've experienced with this person, reflect on it and just see if you can't see that. It's easy to intellectually understand that the person wants to be happy, and so therefore everything they do, they would be doing to create this happiness, but they're just confused, just like we're confused. Maybe we're confused in different ways. But if we can come to that place, then maybe some softening can come. Another practice, of course, that you can do that can really start to soften this and lessen this is the Tonglen practice. Mm-hmm. And in working with this, whether it's immeasurable joy or immeasurable compassion, and with Tonglen, sometimes we do the exercise of taking a person with whom we've had a difficult relationship and imagine them doing things that would repair that relationship, right? So whatever it is that has been difficult for us, we search in our mind, like, what would they have to do to make it right? And imagine them doing those things. And then within that exercise, you can experience the shift in how you relate to them. And then, as is always true, it's definitely okay and it's really good to practice for particular beings that we know are sick, that we know are ill, that we have difficulty with. But we should always use that as an opportunity, use that to leverage our practice to widen it to even more beings. It doesn't detract from the benefit that could come to them from doing practice for them. And it further plants seeds in us that allow us to later open to greater and greater degrees to others. So Tonglen, Chenrezi. And when you do Chenrezi, do you do the practice, Pat?
No, not often.
Okay. So forget about the formal practice then. But just saying the mantra with whatever your understanding is, visualizing yourself and her in that form. We think of it as a game, but it's not like Chenrezi. And for those of you who don't know, we have these practices we do in the Tibetan tradition where we work with what's called a yidam. So it kind of looks like a deity. In fact, that's Chenrezi right there. It's not like this is some god that we pray to. It's not that Chenrezi is anything separate from the inherent awakened nature of our mind. Chenrezi, as we said, is a manifestation of our awakened mind. But if we say, okay, everybody just rest in the compassionate nature of your awakened mind, it's kind of like, don't exactly know what to grab onto. So we have, as a skillful means, this is a manifestation. We relate to it as that. And the form is completely symbolic. White because of the purity, free of all stain. Forearms because the embodiment of the four immeasurables. One face because of the single nature of all phenomena. Legs crossed because of the skills, means, and wisdom united. So we work with imagining ourselves in this form to sort of draw forth this experience. And then at the end of that, and that serves two purposes actually, it undermines our sense of self, which we say is diluted, our clinging to our ordinary sense of self. And I mean, if we believe in reincarnation and how many births and deaths and births and deaths and births and deaths have we had over immeasurable time, yet we cling to this one as so solid and real and special, right? So what has been the underlying current or the thread between all those different births? It's this mind. And what's the nature of this mind? This nature of the mind is the same nature of the mind that the Buddha realized. It's wisdom, it's compassion, it's ability. So through these types of practices, it becomes a skillful means that we can make a connection with this and sort of draw this quality forward. But just as we shouldn't be fixated on or cling to this individual birth as opposed to another, we also don't want to cling to this new, pure sense of self that we've created. So at the end of that practice, we let that go and rest in the space which is left, which is, again, that mind. It's that same awareness, actually, that you may have worked with today in the meditation. So that's just a brief introduction to this Chenrezi practice, since it came up in discussion. So Tonglen, the mantra said to be really beneficial, this compassion, contemplation, immeasurable compassion, imagining her doing things to repair the relationship and seeing if that doesn't change your experience.
Add something.
I was at a retreat with a Tibetan nun who worked in hospice for many years. And she said that with all the families she had worked with, most of them having some kind of conflict. I mean, it's pretty natural. She said she learned that people needed to say 3 things to one another when one was dying, and if the dying one couldn't say it, just contemplate this for yourself. And it was, please forgive me. And whatever that means to you, asking her. And you don't have to do this out loud. This can be your own contemplation in order to clear out some stuff. Please forgive me. I forgive you. I love you. And she said this seemed to boil down to what people needed. And they often couldn't do it, but just the moving toward it helped. And even you move toward it, and she never knows. She'll know. You know what I'm saying? It's like Eric is saying, what you bring into that room. And I did this with my mom as she died. I was able to be there for 3 weeks before she died. She was almost 102 and still living in her home. And it was really helpful. I never said it to her directly. I thought it might stir her up. But I carried that, and it worked really quite well. Yeah. So hopefully that helps. I also noticed, Pat, that you're already carrying so much compassion because you want to. You said, I want to. I want to be compassionate toward her. That's huge compassion already. Not everybody comes into a room like that after difficulties. Yeah.
Thank you, Lama Eric, for being here. I just had a question about if you could speak about an antidote for sadness. I keep a list of many antidotes, and they're very helpful when something particular comes up and applying it. But it's been interesting, even searching around, it's been very difficult to find something that was a specific antidote just for sadness. The closest I could find was stuff for like torpor and sort of, like a sleepy mind kind of thing. And that does seem to help, actually, but I didn't know if there's something more specific that you could speak to. Within the context of a session, or in general? In general, I suppose, like a specific practice. In general, I suppose, and then? Like a specific practice or something that you just know of. Like a modified version of Tonglen or something.
Sadness about, for example, doesn't have to be your example.
Sometimes just sadness in general, or though it could be about like a relative in my own case. But like even in situations where like there's a lot of acceptance, or like I'm meditating with it and just really trying to accept the situation, sometimes the sadness is still there. And I have found that trying to
for example, like sadness about?
Like a conflict with my sister, for example.
Okay.
The one thing that I have found that's helpful sometimes is to treat it like a tiredness and sort of focus on things that would bring me like kind of excited joy and that sort of thing to kind of cut through that, but that's not always helpful.
And again, you mean life experience, sadness in general, not necessarily in the session? Or do you mean in the session?
Well, both. Like if it was like pride, I would do bows and that sort of thing.
It seems really dependent upon the object or the reason for the sadness. Like if we're sad in terms of like our practice or feeling unworthy, something like that, or no?
No, it's more like, right, you know, like doing, you know, one's best one can in a relationship and then seeing things fall apart anyway.
Mm. Sometimes sometimes we can use this kind of sadness or difficulty as a leverage for our refuge. It's like we always hold out this hope that we can sort of square the wheel of samsara, right? That we can game the system. Yeah, I know it's a notion of suffering, but I've got this idea, you know? If only I can get this job and have this partner, maybe live in this part of town, and I'm going to practice, you know? But until we actually wake up to seeing things the way they are, until we free ourselves from the fixation of ourself, fixating on our own happiness, and until we stop looking to external situations and conditions or people or things or status to provide for that happiness, the sadness is inherent, right? So sometimes it might be, if you're in a strong enough place, fuel for the contemplations of the four thoughts, like the inherent limits of samsara, the inherent suffering that exists in samsara. So, but maybe you need to be in a little bit of a stronger place, right, to do that.
Like a wider view?
Like if you're feeling too overwhelmed by it and that kind of contemplation just sends you into a spin of depression, then okay, maybe you don't have enough perspective in the moment to do that. Same thing with impermanence. Maybe the sadness comes about before I had a great relationship with my sister, and now something's changed. And so we're sad about that, you know? Relationships change, relationships come and go. There's nothing that has come together by causes and conditions, a sister, anything that we rely on, can be a source for true happiness, because causes and conditions, by their very nature, don't remain intact and they fall away. And if our well-being and happiness was tied up on those causes and conditions, remaining in a specific way, we were setting ourselves up to experience suffering. It could be used not as a modified Tonglen, but in Tonglen itself. You know, you taking on your sadness and trying to feel yourself relieved of the sadness by just taking it in. Sometimes His Holiness Karmapa gave an instruction to put like a lamp or a flame in the middle of your heart and imagining your suffering, being drawn into that. And then further you can think about, well, okay, I'm sad, but there are probably a lot of people who are sadder than I am. So, okay, I'm feeling this sadness. May my experience of this sadness alleviate them of their sadness. Now this sort of down, sort of heavy state of mind, you've just leveraged it into immeasurable compassion. Pretty much any difficulty we experience, we can take this approach and use it. Something that was otherwise a burden and feeling negative, if you can remember to do this, the mind, just remembering to do it probably lifts the mind a little bit. What to speak of actually engaging in that practice? Your sadness isn't going to magically disappear, but it's going to seem a little, dare I say, and maybe it's not the right thing to say to everybody in every moment, but petty. So we can always use our difficulty to deepen and expand our experiences, our practices of loving kindness and compassion. And I don't know, maybe it's appropriate also to sometimes reflect on the positive aspects of our lives, you know. For people for whom it's getting really heavy and starting to really weigh you down, maybe that could be beneficial.
Good. Maybe something. For me, the way I've been trained, it falls in the affliction of attachment. So I'm attached to a certain outcome, and which is just a different way of saying what Eric's saying, and the outcome doesn't occur, and then the sadness comes. And one of the main things has been, well, each thing we're talking about is transform it, you know, into with your Tonglen or whatever. But another one is imagine a mandala and you are giving away your sister to the Buddha, to people who need a sister. You just keep giving away more. And it's kind of the opposite of we want to grab and have it like this, but training the mind. And especially sometimes I just give people to the Buddha because I don't know what to do with them. I'm like, I am so confused here. Maybe Green Tara could help. So, and it turns it kind of happy, like Green Tara, take him, take her, and may they be well. And I really just keep cutting it and let go and not perseverate. Sadness can cause me to perseverate. Like now the sadness is really solid. But we don't have to do that. We're free to not do that. So those are some things I use.
Hi, my name is Laura. This is my first time here, and I want to thank you all for welcoming me. I've had difficult 4 or 5 years, and am out of practice, and I've struggled with being consistent, and partly that's been due to fear. And I have found that there are times when I sit that very strong emotion comes up, and it is extremely painful and scary. And I've talked with some people about it, but I've yet to really understand how to work with it and remain with it, accept it. And I was hoping maybe you could give me some insight on that.
What is the tradition in which you're practicing?
The tradition?
So meditation?
Meditation, yes.
Okay. Something like what we did tonight?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And your exposure, you have exposure to Buddhism?
Yes.
And
Not a lot, but
okay.
some.
Okay. Is there a story behind the emotion, or is it sometimes story, sometimes just emotion?
I believe that there is story behind it.
And are you clear of the story, or?
Yes. Yes.
And during the emotion, like the story plays out in the mind, like you're remembering things, or?
Not always.
Okay.
Not always. Sometimes it is just the emotion that comes up, and later, I know what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and I know where it's coming from, but it's not that I'm really replaying it.
Mm-hmm. Different things could be appropriate at different times, or maybe even at one time. And not saying that this is necessarily you, but in a general sense, when there's a strong thought contact, when we're experiencing maybe a lot of difficulty in our life, and there's just, some conflict or thing that's kind of consuming us, maybe it starts to play out. We start thinking about it within our meditation. It's just too strong. We just can't quite put it aside, So during those times, maybe, depending on where one's at in one's practice, if you still want to do practice in those times, coarser objects of meditation, like not the first technique we did tonight, more like watching the breath and being a little more intentional about keeping the mindfulness on the breath. Which isn't to say that there shouldn't be any sense that we're trying to suppress the emotion exactly, right? It's just for this time, we're not doing this now. We're going to work through it. We're going to do what we need to do, but that's not right now. Right now, I'm exercising my mindfulness muscle. So you can also work with a particular object, put an object in front of you and place your attention on that. You can work with the breath, and you can keep the sessions short. At other times, if it's just whether it's the thought or the emotion actually, like I mentioned, we're never going to stop these things from arising in our practice. And thank goodness that's not the goal. And actually, what meditation teaches us is that if we look at our mind for long enough, we see that things come and things do go. They don't stay. So it may be challenging, but you could just stay with the emotion. Just watch the emotion like it's a bird flying through the sky of your mind. Not trying to process it, not trying to do anything about it. It's in the field of your awareness, so you're just aware of it. And maybe you're crying, and that's okay. And it won't stay there forever. I mean, it never has, right? Has anything ever stayed forever? No. So that's possible, and it's valid. It's meditation. Meditation isn't about creating some state. It's certainly not about blissing out. It's about being aware of what's going on in our mind. Just that. But where we draw the line is when we start to engage, right? We don't want to do that. And again, just to reinforce, it doesn't mean that the emotion doesn't need to be dealt with, in whatever way, like outside of meditation in terms of whatever we need to do to process it. But we certainly don't want experiences like that to scare us away from the practice, right? So good that you're searching for a way to work with it within that context. And another thing you can do, and you may not know this practice yet, but we've spoken about it a little bit already, is it's called Tong Lin, which means sending and taking. But I'm afraid that we don't have time to say as much as I'd really feel like I needed to say to make it really safe, But just to plant a seed of inquisitiveness or curiosity in your mind, it is this sense of it's a tool to reduce our own clinging to self. It's a tool to open us up to others. And we do so by imagining taking on the suffering of others and sharing any positive qualities we have with others. So it's often, like I mentioned a moment ago, it's like can be this great lever for taking any negative situation that happens in our life and taking this shit and using it as fertilizer, basically. So maybe not a suggestion to start doing this right away, but know that there are things like that that might be beneficial.
I think you said the word fear at some point, right? I've dealt with a lot of anxiety, practically, I'm sure, pre-birth even. And I'm sure all of us do, but it's kind of a specialty of mine, which is a form of fear. And so I'm at a point now where it's what I'm doing when it shows up on or off the cushion, I actually greet it, say, hi, oh, you again. And then I feel it in my body, and that's like a, mindfulness of body. And almost just doing that changes it. It doesn't go away, but it goes away quicker, and I don't make it into something. I think so many of these things like sadness that Sarah brought up and fear, we grab them, especially Westerners. We have this whole emotional, psychological way in our culture, and it's kind of like it's really good if you feel things, and that's true, but we feel and feel and feel and feel, and we feel ourselves into some pretty big suffering. So I also like this image of the bird that passes in the sky and leaves no trace. You look at a bird when it goes, sky is right there, bird's gone, like, wow, I can't see any bird trail. But we, I don't know if we're trying to make ourselves sometimes, well, I'll just say my own experience, I try and make myself special because I'm really sad, or I'm really scared, or I'm really anxious. We have to just watch out for that. How we add on to the thing that could just pass by, but we aren't letting it. Now we're identified with it. And we don't have to do that. Just like, hi. Okay, I see you. Okay, bye. And it will keep coming, but it comes less often, less potent. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's on. I've heard a lot about the importance of remembering the kindness of mothers and the preciousness of mothers and mother-like figures in Buddhism and in Tibetan Buddhism is considered very valuable. And I have a question about relationships with parents.
Offer them to the Buddha.
Good answer. So I'll preface this with saying that I actually still cohabitate with my parents, so that kind of is where this question comes from. How do I transform my view of myself in relation to my parents from one of failure and burdensomeness to one of value and worthiness? I want to feel happy and grateful for being the son of my father and mother, but I do not.
So without looking at your notes, what is it again?
I want to be grateful for being fortunate enough to have been born the son of my mother and father. And I want to be happy about the life that I have with them now, as it is. But I don't feel any of that. My relationship to myself as the child of my parents is one of feeling like I fail them on a daily basis.
They express that to you?
Not on a daily basis, and not directly, but there's a lot of times where I will feel berated, chided for making short-sighted decisions, for not planning ahead, for not being as competent an adult as they would like, I think. And of course, I can easily say that a lot of this is how I feel. I haven't asked them I've never asked them if they feel this.
You began by talking about how Tibetan Buddhism does use, we say all mother sentient beings, right? Why do we say all mother sentient beings? It's supposed to evoke in us this appreciation that in general people have for their parents, and there are certain contemplations we can do where, and again, this is like we've mentioned a couple times already, this is meant to be a generally good starting place for someone to begin to leverage a positive relationship with one person into loving kindness, compassion, bodhicitta towards all beings, whether we've met them or not. So it was just taken as a general rule that if we have to put just one being in this text that most people are going to be able to relate to, and they probably have this kind of relationship with them, the mother makes sense, right? So it's not more or less than that in the Tibetan tradition. That's why it's used, as far as I can tell.
I've heard a story about Pacho Rinpoche chastising one of his students for not including his mother in his prayers on a daily basis, and told him to, for 7 days straight, only contemplate the kindness of his mother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's, there are steps. There are like 7 traditional steps. I think they're from Atisha that talk about how to generate bodhicitta. And the first step is to have this appreciation. It's like if you can't develop, in general, right, for someone who had a relatively normal upbringing with parents that, that reared them, if you can't generate this for your mother, good luck generating it for anybody else. That's sort of the assumption, which isn't always true, especially in the West these days. Yeah. Okay. But in terms of wanting to appreciate our parents more, it's the same. Have you had teachings on the 4 measurables: immeasurable compassion and loving kindness, etc.?
Yes, with Zopa.
Great. And there are so many ways to teach it, but did you do the exercise where you imagine them doing things to change the relationship you have with them?
No.
Okay, so you can do that. That's another, there are so many ways to work with them, right? But this is one that you can do. You imagine a being with whom you have a difficult relationship. And you imagine, so there's some reason that relationship is difficult. And you imagine them doing whatever they would need to do in your mind to make it okay. And you just sort of let the story play out. And I've found that every time I've done this with somebody, every time I'm able to get to the place where in the moment my feelings about them change. So maybe it fades, when you get up off the cushion and you walk out and you get berated or something, but maybe it doesn't go back all the way to where it was before, And if we can appreciate that, they're really doing their best in a sense, which doesn't excuse anything that anybody has done to someone to harm them. But what it does mean is that they're just really confused about the causes of their own happiness and suffering. The fact that they think it's going to be good for you, good for them, good for everybody if they do this. It's just such a mistaken view. That can be a source of compassion. And the fact that you've made it this far in life, the fact that you made it to 1 week old, is definitely due to the kindness of your parents, right? This is the traditional part of the traditional contemplation. As social beings, we don't have the instincts to survive in the world when we drop out of the womb, Someone doesn't pick us up. Game over. So you can, and I'm sure that in your life experience, there must be some things that if you reflect back, ways that they have been kind to you, things that they have provided for you, for which you're grateful. And maybe leaning into these a little bit more and having some just beginning to appreciate that, yeah, they're not Buddhas, they're not perfect people either. Starting to see them as humans, you know? It's very interesting, you know? I can be very patient with a lot of different people that I meet in random situations. I remember going back to see my family once I started practicing and feeling like, oh, now I've got all these tools to take into this situation, right? I feel like I'm going to be able to transform my experience and maybe have a positive effect on their experience. And, you know, just know the patterns are so deep, so set, you know. But I must say that with time that has changed. It absolutely has changed. My brother and I fought a lot when we were young, and he's kind of a hothead. And I'm kind of, I kind of know where his weakness is. I kind of know right where to stick the pin, you know? But anyway, so we have this pattern. So like he says something and I say something back, and then it just escalates. One time I'm back visiting, and my brother and I have no idea what it was about, but this was starting. You know, the volley was starting. We're standing at the baseline with our rackets, and we're just firing forehands, starting to fire forehands back and forth. And my sister and my mother are in the room, and they've seen the game before, so you can kind of see them starting to white knuckle a little bit, you know? But I was able to notice that this was about to happen, and I was able to, he hit the forehand back, and I didn't swing. I just let the ball go by me. I didn't respond. And then there was just a space, and the ball just hit the backstop, and then it just started. And then I was able to say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't know what I said, but I apologized, or I acknowledged something that, my part in what was about to unfold. And he just melted, you know? It was an incredible experience to have. So we can alter our relationships through these contemplations, and in the moment, there are things that we can do that can sort of make up for the part that we have played in this drama as well.
That's a big part of it for me. Is when I acknowledge how much they've done for me, it's difficult to not cast myself in a very poor light. That I haven't done as much as I should with what they've given me. That I haven't done as well as I should have with what they've given me.
I need to be careful there too, right? I don't want to swing too far in the other direction.
That's kind of what my question was in the first place. I just didn't word it very well.
And maybe to just, we all have these old family dynamics, you know? And the more that we practice, the more that we develop the skill of seeing what's playing out in our mind in the moment, the more that we have real choice in the moment, the more that we can engage in interactions that, in every situation up to this point, there are grooves in the record, and when you drop the needle, this is how it's going to unfold. Once we develop this awareness in the moment, we begin to have the choice to play another tune, you know? And it can be an incredible experience for yourself to see yourself, like acknowledging and not engaging, and also for the people with whom you've played. And then we begin to have the space to have a difficult conversation. You know, Mom and Dad, I feel like I maybe haven't lived up to your expectations, and I kind of feel bad about that, but sometimes I feel like, you know, that you feel this way about me, and I don't know if it's true, and is it true? You know, then we start to have space where we can actually have a conversation that isn't just reactive forehand rallies from the baseline, you know.
Thank you.
And it's really good to, if you want to meditate, it's really important to be regular. And you do that by making this commitment to yourself, and it's also important to create the pattern of making commitments and keeping them. So starting very small, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, whatever you know you can do. But not only that, even once you establish that pattern, many of us have once you establish a pattern, it's pretty easy to keep it also. So if you start small and reinforce it, then it's not very easily lost. But even then, what we need to do, even if you meditate every day in the morning for a half hour or whatever, to take time throughout the day to bring yourself back to that space, even if it's just 1 minute or less, can have a really profound impact on our experience of the world, whether it's with our family, with our work, in our recreation, whatever. So in that spirit, maybe, what do you do? Do you do the dedication again? Yeah. Before we do the dedication again, maybe just for 1 minute, and we know it's only 1 minute, so maybe our sense of intention in the meditation, maybe it's able to bring a little clearer awareness. It's always this balance between relaxation and awareness, whether it's awareness of breath or just awareness of the content of mind. Let's do that again for just a moment.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.
And so I stay most of the time in India, actually, and every year I go to Bodh Gaya, which is where the Buddha attained enlightenment. He sat under a tree and attained his enlightenment there. I've collected a lot of leaves that fell from that exact tree, and in that little room where the bookstore is on the table, you'll see many, many leaves. So anyone who has not gotten one of these leaves from me before, feel free to take one. You can take it home, maybe put it in a little frame up on your altar. I worked very hard to collect them and transport them. None of them are cracked, so they were treated with care, so be careful with it on the way home. They're a little fragile. You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.